having good infrastructure in there and helping keep the officers engaged and comfortable is definitely a priority.
Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Matt Scott and Mike Witt. We're here for another episode of Complacency Kills. This is episode 32, and we're going to be discussing how guard booths impact on emergency responses.
Great. I'm excited to talk about it. It's a big part of what we do.
Well, first and foremost, how you doing, Mike?
I'm doing all right today. I'm enjoying this beautiful day here in Kannapolis. Can't complain.
Thanksgiving is right on the rise, man, and
I know you can't wait.
Yeah, I certainly cannot. That sweet potato casserole's calling my name.
Did you get a 4XL set of pants?
With no drawstring? Sure.
All right.
I want to take everything to the limit. Moving forward. No, this is actually a good podcast we're going to be discussing. It's, obviously guard booths and talking about emergency responses and seeing how, when we discuss emergency responses, a lot of people just think about, okay, well, this is just going to be up for a project. Well, what about emergency responses? And, speaking about like law enforcement activities and or like military activities, how really does or how important does a guard booth impact everything?
Well, I mean, on emergency response, right, a lot of that is depending on your setup, right, it's going to be a mobile type unit and depending on what their application and needs are. Often in law enforcement, you'll see a lot of sheriff's departments, police departments will have mobile command centers. Some may be ballistically rated as well. So if they're going into like a hostage type scenario or a mass casualty scenario or something like that, where they need to set up a command post for their operations, right, they'll often bring those types of systems out and deploy them, right, for as long as they need in that particular area. So for emergency response, obviously they're critical, right? I think when it comes to the communication systems and stuff like that, I think they were definitely more critical back, in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, when primarily, they're using UHF, VHF type communications. Nowadays, with a lot of, sat phones and cell phone and a lot of other communication tools, using it as a command post to allow comms to actually exist is a little less important. Still a thing, but primarily it's to make sure all your decision makers are there in one place, able to quickly communicate to one another and have a good situational awareness of whatever's going on scene. Outside of that, for more permanent application, right? Typically at your perimeters or vital access points at any facility. If there's an incident and there is an emergency, a lot of those soldiers or security personnel that are working those gates at those guard booths, obviously they'll typically be the front line for communication, passing down to command what's actually happening on scene, ensuring if they do have surveillance type systems that their command and control center has the ability to have eyes on it, and see what they're saying and hopefully pass on instruction to the officers that are engaged in whatever emergency situation that they're in. So yeah, they play a big role. A lot of it's situational dependent, but the key thing is when you're selecting a booth for emergency response in particular is ensuring that the booth itself, the structure itself, is designed to meet all of the criteria that you're looking for. So, protection against particular threats, right? So it could be blast or ballistic threats, depending on the kind of environment you're going into. Obviously, outfitting it with the proper surveillance tools, communication tools, and workspaces for all those that are needing to participate in an emergency type response. And those are really the main things that you're looking for, right? When it comes, to the manufacturer themselves, I think the big thing is looking at what their prior experience is, understanding what kind of designs and capabilities that they can offer you. And again, a big thing is looking at the manufacturing quality, the warranty, and the lead time, right, that a lot of these manufacturers can provide you. Those are some of the first things that you would start with. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's either permanent or a mobile structure. That's all it is, right? But it's the details that go into it in terms of its capability to perform a task. That's where you get differentiators between different manufacturers.
Right.
So,
well, I appreciate you answering every question.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for letting me not answer one. But something I really want to kind of discuss, and if you can give me like an example, right? So, okay, I'll give an example. Let's say January 6th, right?
Okay.
That was obviously chaos. How often is the use of a guard booth or a mobile comms unit like really overlooked?
I wish I could answer that better. I don't, I'm not up to speed on every department and how they integrate those kinds of systems. I will say that departments that do have that capability are typically going to perform better, more effectively and efficiently, as opposed to a department or unit that has very, unset infrastructure and decentralized command and control. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it certainly does. And you thinking, uh, obviously, using that for a command control center, would this coordinate a better effort to pose a good situational awareness and ease of flow of just operations solely for those departments if they did have a just a guard booth, or I'm sorry, a mobile guard booth even?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, if you look at like the type of operations, if you come into something crazy like back in, what was it, 94, the Waco, Texas deal, where, law enforcement is out there and engaged from potential threats for, extended duration, weeks and weeks on end. Yeah, I mean, you absolutely want to have some sort of foundation and of command and control, when you're setting, up your perimeter and essentially strategizing what your next order of operation is for, whatever your mission is. But yeah, it's definitely a tool that you'd rather have and not need.
Okay. The recent videos that we were just doing, and I mean, you hit on quite a bit. I mean, obviously, I did a few things for tips, and then you went over obviously the functionality of all guard booths. How does that play in really responding and kind of building up from ground up for the guard booth that's going to really responsive and curtailed to that specific department and how they operate?
I mean, usually guard booths are going to be manned, right? And so anytime you have a manned location, you have personnel that are there that are able to make decisions and have a direct and immediate impact on security. And so, a lot of times these will be set up at vital access control points or at the perimeter. And that's typically, going to be the area or location where you're going to have your first type of, whatever security or emergency type situation. And so again, having a focal point for them to conduct their security operations, their communication operations, and allowing, depending on the type of facility, flow of traffic, impacts on logistics for a business, all those sorts of things can be impactful. Like, I remember when I first got out of the Marine Corps and started going to school, I worked a security job and I was in a guard booth. Yeah.
My boy,
Yep.
it's all right.
And really at that particular post, my job was more security was definitely a part of it, but it was more ensuring the logistical tracking of all the trucks coming in and out. And then ensuring that the cargo, was there and not tampered with. Right. But the security piece of it, was kind of secondary. My performance was primarily based off of the accuracy of the data that I passed them on trucks, inbound, outbound, what truck, what haul, that sort of thing. So again, all those have different requirements and needs for what an officer is quote unquote doing there. But one of the big things, again, when you're in that booth for 12 hours, it can get dark, lonely, cold.
Yeah.
Wet, so having good infrastructure in there and helping keep the officers engaged and comfortable is definitely a priority, especially in roles like that, because I could go like an hour and just truck after truck after truck. And then in the middle of the night, I could go 4 hours and not see anybody.
Right.
Right. And so being cold and miserable, not having access to a bathroom, stuff like that are typically not ideal. So those are all, considerations that security managers need to take in when they're building their facility out.
So, and kind of going back to the whole basis of this from on emergency response, and you're talking about the comforts. How does the comforts play into the emergency response? Obviously, setting up like a comms unit, or if there was a active shooter event and you had to go ahead and place outside of a school or hospital, what say you? And how does that play for the functionality and over time, just overall operations for that specific unit?
So I would just say overall officer alertness and awareness and engagement in their job.
Yeah.
What you don't want to do is just add more reasons why a security officer hates going to work. And so if they're spending the majority of their time in this in this booth and they're having to perform these security functions that they may or may not be fond of, but it's the job they chose. But if you give them additional reasons like, hey, I have a steel chair to sit on and I have a plywood desk and HVAC that can't keep up, and when it rains, the roof leaks, and I have mold in here. Those sorts of things will wear on officers, and just continue to add. Security officer turnover is a huge thing. There's very, very few companies that don't struggle with turnover when it comes to security officers. So when you continue to pile on more and more reasons why they hate coming to their job, it's not beneficial for you, for your employees, or the end users that benefit from having security personnel there. So that's why it's definitely important. Maybe invest a little bit more into your employees, and by that would be investing more into the infrastructure that they have to use every day.
Solid. That's a damn good answer. So you brought up something that really kind of like sparked something in my head. But Western North Carolina, they just had that horrific hurricane come up from the south. And obviously FEMA was out there, got there a little late, is what it is. But I think they were doing coordinations out of vehicles, out of cabins or whatnot. Or, logistically, I don't think it was there. But how would they benefit more so using a guard booth, or at least a booth in general for their comms operations?
Yeah, I mean, typically the mobile command centers is what, again, it kind of goes back to what we talked to earlier, having a centralized location that we can go into any climb, any place, and still have the assets and resources that you need to conduct in this case, your emergency rescue mission. So yeah, I mean, obviously that is a much better solution than having to take over abandoned buildings, having, officers or personnel individualize off in their own vehicles, kind of doing their own thing, as opposed to having all the decision makers, together centralized, to quickly and better coordinate efforts. So
Good deal. Now, do you typically coordinate with GCs or anyone pushing these for the guard boost to put their specific twist, or if they want accommodations or amenities specific?
yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, a lot of it comes down to the general contractor or the architect, or even the security manager at these facilities, kind of describing what their needs are. Really, I try to start with them as like, what's your mission and what's your intent? Why are you putting this here, and how do you think it's going to benefit you? And then kind of going from there, we can work into more granular. What do your officers, rotations look like? What kind of officers are they? Armed, unarmed? How long are their shifts in here? How much space do they need to work? What tasks are they performing inside that booth? And so kind of all that feeds into the design criteria that we give them to say, okay, well, functionally you need X, Y, and Z. And for these, other reasons, whether it's your environmental reasons, duration of your shift, whatever the case may be, hey, these are all the climate control, comfort, amenities type stuff that you'd want to look at. So ultimately, guard boost is one of those things. It's not a sexy thing. It's not something super high speed. It's honestly not a thing that most people get super excited about. So large in part, a lot of companies will go out and say, I just need the cheapest thing out there.
Yeah.
Because, it's kind of like, hey, I need a shed to store my stuff. Cool.
Right.
I'm going to get the cheapest shed. However, that will have impacts on you 6 months, a year, 5 years down the line, for a variety of reasons, whether you don't have the right setup to conduct your operations, you have bad living environments for your officers, all those sorts of things can impact. So that's why I try and take more time on the front end with customers to really get a better grasp on what they're actually looking for, as opposed to checking a box on a spec sheet saying, hey, I need a 10 by 10 box for someone to kind of live in for 12 hours a day.
Okay. So you order let's say a 10 by 10 guard booth, and it's set up. It's UL level, let's say 4. Do they have the accommodations here to go ahead and outfit later on to make it, let's say, UL level 10?
Yeah, for sure. If you're talking about like an existing booth that's already out in the field, there's a lot of things that would impact whether we could do a armor upgrade on a particular booth, as opposed to just building them a whole brand new booth. Because
Right.
sometimes the upfits can ultimately cost more than just a new booth. So there's a lot of things that that would impact that. But Is it possible? Yeah, for sure it's possible.
Given your your recent history in the Marines,
I don't know about recent, but sure.
well, you've been out a little bit, sure. Not like me, 12 years, cool. Uh, not really having a stay in guard boots overseas, but did you ever have a stay over in guard boots overseas?
No.
Yeah, I never had.
Mm-mm.
I guess I never had the
So,
opportunity.
yeah, you weren't afforded the pleasure. Definitely been out on post with Hescos and sandbags, but not,
I guess in comparison to Hescos and sandbags, what would your recommendations be for a guard booth in comparison to those?
Sure. I would love something that's ballistic rated. First and foremost, something you can easily fight from, and something with good HVAC. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy drinking hot Gatorade.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
good.
delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Really talking about adaptability to guard booths. I mean, you just hit on, an existing guard booth having the capability of changing it from UL level 4 to UL level 10. And then having that guard booth said changed, would you recommend that any of these departments or critical infrastructure facilities or, federal agencies, they have a slew, whether it be non-ballistic, ballistic, already and available for these emergency responses?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like, would you say that they have a generalized overview, or at least, have the guard boosts readily available? Let's say, you have a non-ballistic, and then you have your non-ballistic booth versus your ballistic booth. You have your ballistic booth on a trailer. What would work better for emergency response? Obviously on a trailer, but
I mean, it's all need and mission specific
there
dependent.
you go.
Some environments, a environmental enclosure will do just fine. Putting a basic environmental enclosure at a high threat location, can you do it? Sure. Would I recommend it if there's a threat and possibility of forced entry, ballistics, or explosives being used to attack that position? I probably would say that's not an ideal solution. But it's up to the customer at the end of the day. We just try to give our best recommendations on what we've seen out in the field.
Good to go. Yeah, I think, for guard boosts, I know you typically deal with obviously guard boosts, but what about, the blast and ballistic rated enclosures? Are those utilized for emergency responses as well?
Not really emergency response specific. Obviously, like bomb squads and stuff like that will have specialized containerized vehicles to place explosives. It's a little different. But when it comes to emergency response, really the blast and ballistic rated enclosure is something we typically see either at nuclear facilities or high consequence like DOE facilities or military installations, where again the threat threshold is much higher. But for emergency response, no. Again, the closest thing I can really think of are the specialized containerized vehicles they use for bomb squad.
I got you. Any recommendations for like natural disasters or like hazardous material spills or any of that jazz?
Again, something that's mobile, something that you can deploy in any climate and place, and just ensuring it has all the functionality that you need. Again, it's all very mission dependent.
Yeah, I guess you did say mission specific.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. What would you say about balancing the investment or ROI for this?
A lot of times, again, it depends what you're doing. Security is not like a direct correlative ROI type investment usually, right? The best way that you can offset or look at ROI from a security perspective is what's at stake or what's lost if I don't take this specific action, in this case deploying a guard booth or an access control point, right? So it could be, is it loss of life? Is it loss of assets and material, right, due to theft or destruction? And so, those are the kind of the ROI things that you have to look at. On the nuclear side, it's a little different. We do a lot of work in the nuclear space, and a lot of their return on investment on the nuclear side is going to be how can they reduce their overall security cost, right? And essentially, unfortunately for jobs, that means how can we reduce our officer count, right? So a lot of times they'll look at how can they re-strategize to conduct the same, if not better, security operations with less people. And so typically that's the big ROI that you'll see from more of a force protection stance.
Good deal. And how often, or at least for emergency responses, have you been kind of in it to win it here at Kontek? like anything like dealing with emergency responses or natural disasters that you've responded to, or at least we have responded to?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I know we've done stuff and quoted stuff to FEMA. Um, a large in part, I would say most of our booths are not necessarily in the emergency response space. They're more in the security or force protection space. But yeah, there is a place for it for emergency services. But again, a lot of that is more focused on like a command and control center.
Yeah.
So whether that's hauled by a trailer or it's integrated into a large like RV or truck itself, that's a whole nother thing. But again, we primarily focus on, an enclosure that would be hauled on a trailer for that type of application.
Fair enough. And what would you call emergency response, especially utilizing a ballistic enclosure or even a mobile?
So for emergency response, again, that would go back to primarily law enforcement applications, to where if they need to set up a command and control center and in a high threat environment where the people need to work in a specific proximity, but they're also still exposed to the threat, then yeah, I would absolutely recommend, if that's an occurrence that you foresee in the future or at least want to be prepared for, then, looking at a ballistic-rated type command and control center would be something I would recommend.
Yeah, as I know recently working with Cabarrus County, they do a lot of work, or at least a lot of training for active shooter response. And I can't say that I have seen any type of mobile BRE or guard booth over there for their emergency response, but they do have a mobile unit. I think it might be a Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of law enforcement agencies, whether it's a Bearcat or retired MRAP or things like that, they can often use those because it kind of fits the bill. It has the climate control features, it has the communication features, it has the blast and ballistic, capabilities in it. So those often will make a good solution, especially for law enforcement.
Yeah, good deal. I appreciate you answering all the questions.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you guys took something away on the guard booths. And again, Matt, always appreciate hanging out. And hopefully, we'll catch you on episode 33.
Thank you, guys.
All right, guys. Bye.